Hey there, welcome back to Self and Path. First things first, I'm sorry that it took me so long to make this video. I know that some of you have been asking for W5700X review for a while now, and I ordered the GPUs as soon as they became available. However, with all the stuff happening in China, it took a while for them to arrive. When they arrived, I was actually busy with work, and then it took about 7 days to actually make this video and run all the tests. So it seems like I've been sitting on them for a month, which is almost true. But this video is finally here, you're watching it, so that means it's live, it's on YouTube. And I thank you for your patience and for actually stopping by again to see my channel. Now, what this video is really all about is the W5700X GPU from Apple, which comes in this really amazing box, as you will see in the unboxing that's following my blabbering right now. However, I didn't want to test with just one of them. I mean, we have to make this channel a little bit unique. So I bought two of them. These two cards do not have an interlink technology like Vega II's do. So you cannot actually link them up into becoming one big GPU. So whatever software you're using has to be able to support two separate solo GPUs and spread the workloads. So the idea was to test and see how the system and different applications perform with one of these, with two of these, how the system performs with one Vega II and one W5700X, and then how the system performs with two W5700X GPUs inside it. Now, keep in mind, full disclosure, I am not an expert when it comes to testing GPUs. My usual workflows, working with virtual machines and utilizing it in full when it comes to CPU and RAM and SSD, does not really tap into the GPU performance all that much. The only time I personally use GPUs and the power that they provide is when I'm editing some of these videos for Self and Path and when I'm exporting them, right? I want the fastest possible export time because once I've made a 40-minute video, I don't really want to wait an hour for it to actually be exported and uploaded to YouTube. So that's the extent. I sometimes play a couple of games here and there, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In the boot camp I'll play Doom Eternal and things like that. But that's like 1% of my GPU usage spent on games really or anything else. I'm not a content creator or a professional video editor. However, I did a couple of tests for you so you can see how quickly these particular GPU configurations can export 4K video into H.264, 1080p and 4K, as well as into H.265, 1080p and 4K. So this HEVC format is a little bit different, so we just wanted to compare those times as well. And I also did the export in DaVinci Resolve Free Edition, in Final Cut Pro X, and in Premiere Pro. So all of these three were used to export the same 5-minute video, which was recorded in Apple ProRes 422HQ. That was the original source, 5-minute Apple ProRes 422HQ, and exporting it out into the video formats I just mentioned. I did some gaming. Really, I just used Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and just to see how good of a performance can you actually have in both Windows and OS X when doing their standard benchmark using all of these GPU configurations. So without further ado, let's jump into quick unboxing and then I'll show you the numbers, and you let me know if you want to see anything else while I still have these cards. I'm going to list them on eBay probably in a day or two. I do not know how fast I will go considering there are no W5700X GPUs on eBay. Maybe they'll just go in a day. But I personally don't want to actually keep them. After all of these tests that I have done, I'm extremely happy with the Vega II I already have. And since I already paid for it, I know it's a very expensive card, I think $2,800 versus whatever these are, $800, $900. But since I already have it, I already paid for it, and I really love the performance, I'm actually going to stick with it. But let's see the numbers and you decide for yourself. Before we begin with tests, let me share with you my Mac Pro config as of today. It has a 3.2 GHz 16-core Xeon W3245 CPU, 384 gigs of RAM using 64 GB 2933 MHz DIMMs, 6K Apple Pro Display XDR attached to AMD Radeon Pro Vega GPU with 32 GB of HMB VRAM, and for storage, the only drive that matters for today's tests is the OWC 8TB RAID 0 PCI Express card, since all media lives on it. Since it only has about 1 TB left out of 8, it's fast on writes, however a bit slower on reads than usual. However, still plenty fast for what we're doing here. I'm fast forwarding through cracking the outer shell of the package here, as the thing we all really want to see is the pretty Mac Pro MPX module box inside of it. And as is the case with all other Mac Pro packaging, this box does not disappoint either. Sliding the tabs on left and right allows us to access the carefully wrapped GPU inside. It is very well wrapped into plasticky material you'd expect to get your laser toner cartridge in. Except that this time around, it's a W5700X Radeon Pro MPX module. Moving the box aside, let's take a quick look at the module itself. As you can see, it looks like any other MPX module. We have the standard X16 PCI Express connector, as well as the Apple's proprietary MPX connector, which provides extra power as well as Thunderbolt connectivity. The GPU is partially see-through, as the bulk of it is used as a radiator. You won't find any fans here, and as expected, it is absolutely silent. As you have seen me open up a Mac Pro in a few previous videos, I will fast forward through this part as well so that we can get to testing. My first battery of tests involved benchmarks with both Vega II and W5700X being inside the machine. So after removing the retaining brackets on both sides and dusting off the top of my Vega II, which hasn't seen the light of day for 2 months, I slid in the new GPU into the slot above it. While all of this was quite straightforward, I have to admit, having to unplug all of my cables every time I wanted to access the inside of a Mac Pro did get annoying very quickly. On the bright side, I now have 8 Thunderbolt ports on the back. For starters, I wanted to do a few synthetic benchmark tests using the well-known benchmark utilities. First on the list was the good old Geek Bench 5. We can test our GPUs with 2 different compute APIs. On OS X, we have OpenCL and Metal, and on Windows, we have OpenCL and Vulkan. However, as soon as the results came in, I noticed something weird happening. Vega II results were 83 and 86% faster than those of a W5700X in OpenCL and Metal benchmarks. That's completely off the charts, and I didn't buy it for a second. I immediately jumped into Windows 10 via Boot Camp to see if Geek Bench 5 was reporting similar results with OpenCL and Vulkan. While results differed a bit, they were still way off anything I expected. What the heck? This was a puzzle for a few hours until I was at the point of testing performance with 2 W5700X GPUs. Here, the anomaly was showing itself in a different way. First of 2 GPUs was getting the crappy results we've seen before, but benchmarking the second GPU looked much better. Keep in mind, these 2 top numbers are both coming from a W5700X. However, one is primary with a monitor attached to it, and the second one is just sitting solo in the machine. I sadly do not know which result is from which GPU, but if I remember correctly, the GPU with no monitor plugged into it was the one that performed better. So, a W5700X is capable of performance I expected, but I could not get those numbers with just one GPU in the machine. At this point, Geek Bench 5 did not seem 100% trustworthy, but as I've been running these tests for hours, I can make some guesstimates of my own. In this synthetic benchmark, I'm 90% confident Vega II is about 19% faster than W5700X in OpenCL, and at most 53% faster in Vulkan. Benchmarking Metal performance in OS X with W5700X was so inconsistent, with scores going from 15,000 to 71,000 that I cannot even report it. But hey, that's synthetic benchmarks for you. The real-world benchmarks we'll see later paint a different and more realistic picture. Now let's get into video encoding performance. The tests involved converting a 5-minute 4K 23.98p ProRes 422HQ video into 1080p, H.264 and H.265 aka HEVC format, as well as into 4K H.264 and HEVC using Final Cut Pro X, DaVinci Resolve and Adobe Premiere Pro. In FCPX, I used the Apple device's 1080p and 4K beta quality options for export. Of note is that in both 1080p as well as 4K exports, all multi-GPU setups performed almost identically. One Vega II was as quick alone as when combined with the W5700X, and also as quick as a dual W5700X setup. Obviously, 2 GPUs are faster than one, however, that depends on how good the software is at utilizing them. A solo W5700X did poorly in 1080p H.264, being 64% slower than our multi-GPU configs. However, in HEVC mode, the graph is a bit misleading, but the numbers show it was really only just 10 seconds behind all the others, but two of them were almost as fast as one. This irked me a bit, but the reality of it is even weirder. Here's the GPU load graph when exporting in Apple 4K H.264 with a single Vega II GPU. Note the GPU load, 95+% consistently. So far so good. This is the best case scenario, maximizing the GPU during the export process. Now let's take a look at exporting the same video on a system with both Vega II and W5700X. Check out the GPU load graph. Our Vega II is again consistently at 95+% as before, but in addition we have the W5700X throwing in some horsepower, about 25+%. The activity monitor confirms that we are now using about 125% of GPU or about. One would expect we should be 25% faster in this multi-GPU setup. However, the test results say otherwise. The two GPUs, even when one is at full load, as when in solo mode, ended up converting this 4K video in almost the exact same time. Alright, on to DaVinci Resolve. Here you will notice that in both 1080p as well as in 4K mode, DaVinci seems to produce much more consistent results. In 1080p, single W5700X is just 15% behind a Vega II and about 30% behind in 4K. This is what I expected to see. Do note that I believe even better multi-GPU results are possible when using a non-free or studio edition of DaVinci Resolve. The free version I am using allows hardware acceleration with up to one GPU. However, my observation is that even in free version, DaVinci will split the workloads over two GPUs but will not utilize them both at 100%. In Adobe Premiere Pro, again, it seems that 3 of 4 of our setups perform identically. However, a single W5700X is about 61% slower than a Vega II in 1080p and about 57% slower in 4K H.264 tests. The most disappointing result here is the 6 minute and 15 second encode time of a 5 minute 4K video into a 4K H.264. We're done with our H.264 results. Let's see how H.265 or HEVC performance looks like. When you first look at this, don't let the visual representation of the graphs confuse you. The differences are only in seconds, and this really looks phenomenal. It seems in HEVC, all GPUs have identical performance. In 1080p, our 5 minute video took about 45 to 50 seconds to encode, and in 4K, just a bit over 2.5 minutes. Of note, once again, is that two W5700X performed as fast as a single one. We will take a deeper look into this shortly and compare the GPU load graphs once again, this time for HEVC multi-GPU workloads. Before we get to that, I just wanted to contrast one more metric. In FCPX, exporting into 1080p in HEVC is about 50% faster than when exporting the same video into H.264. And it is about 30% faster to export 4K videos in HEVC than is to export them in H.264. Gotta love that hardware acceleration, right? A single Vega II is at about 40% load throughout the encode process. However, two W5700X GPUs seem to be at about 30% and 10% respectively. From all of this, my conclusion is that there is some room for optimization in multi-GPU utilization for most of these editors. Only DaVinci Resolve seems to have this really figured out. Our final results for 4K HEVC in Final Cut Pro between one Vega II and two W5700X show an identical encode time, but then this is only within a second of a single Vega II or one paired with a W5700X as well. Now on to my new favorite, DaVinci Resolve. It shows that good encode times are possible and that there does not need to be a huge difference between H.264 and HEVC encode time when you know what you're doing. While 4K HEVC encode was about 23% slower than H.264, on a single W5700X it was actually faster by 5 seconds. Knowing that free version of DaVinci limits GPU acceleration, it is probably safe to assume that the dual W5700X setup would have really kicked some butt in the studio version. For those of you who may want to see how the multi-GPU loads differ between editors as well as file formats, I took this little snapshot in time from my GPU history graph in OS X. Note how DaVinci graphs are very, almost artificially flat, much more so than others. Considering we're encoding in variable bitrate mode, I expected more randomness. This is what led me to believe that the free version of DaVinci Resolve actually uses 2 GPUs, even though they say they'll only use 1, but will still limit the processing to a maximum 50% of each GPU. Now again, this is just a guess and an observation I wanted to show you, but quite interesting graph nonetheless. Okay, and lastly, Adobe Premiere Pro HEVC benchmark. Here, H.264 encode times are pretty much identical to their HEVC counterparts, though performance of single W5700X still kind of sucks. I expected a bit more, but again, I believe it's Premiere Pro's and not GPU's fault. So, let's summarize. Please remember that numbers here do not show if one editor exports faster than the other, as the output formats could differ a little bit. However, one can conclude that both Final Cut Pro X and Adobe Premiere Pro do not know how to fully utilize W5700X in either H.264 or HEVC, whereas DaVinci seems to be much better at it. So as far as picking the editor goes, at least when it comes to export speeds, DaVinci Resolve is the king of speed and consistency. I might actually switch. But when it comes to GPUs, W5700X seems to be a decent GPU for the money when compared to performance and price of a Vega II, $1,000 versus $2,800. In apps that know how to properly use 2 GPUs, the 2 W5700X were better than 1 in H.264 exports in Final Cut and all exports in Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. If your workload or application doesn't know how to use solo GPUs, then horizontal scaling doesn't make sense and you'd be better off with a Vega II or a Vega II Duo. An example of a single GPU workload in a multi-GPU system is of course gaming. Since we're on a Mac Pro and we're using AMD and not NVIDIA, and there is no crossfire or Infinity Fabric link between GPUs in our system, the game will only use the GPU to which the monitor is physically attached. I ran the standard Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark in 2K, 4K and 6K resolution at highest settings, and here are the results I got. Of note is that in OS X, this game was almost unplayable with the W5700X in any of those resolutions, as frame rates were atrocious. However, same W5700X in Windows 10 in Boot Camp gave a Vega II run for its money. So if you wondered if you would be able to game on a Mac Pro with either W5700X or a Vega II, the answer is yes. At least you'll be able to play this game. I did not benchmark Doom Eternal in Windows 10 via Boot Camp, but I do play it and I can easily hit 60 frames per second at 4K resolution, and about 40 frames per second if I really want the 6K native resolution of my display. Oh, and I did play Crisis Warhead, and in ultra settings at 4K it's actually quite good. Now, for all PC fans out there, including myself, yes, I know that a $1,000 NVIDIA RTX GPU can kick Mac Pro's butt, even with a $2,800 Vega II in it, but that's not the point here. Also, I bet you that the PC cannot do it while running silently, so there's that. In conclusion, W5700X seems like a decent GPU. If I did not already have a Vega II and was looking for an upgrade from a 580X, at 1/3 of the cost of a Vega II, this would be the GPU I pick up. Some other YouTubers have reviews of a 5700 XT in their Mac Pros, and while performance of those is probably very close to W5700X GPU, considering 2 GPUs are built on the same platform, the ruckus their fans make due to lack of any decent fan control in OS X would make them a no-go for me. In addition, W5700X is the only Mac Pro GPU from Apple which supports display stream compression, DSC, and if the extra bandwidth it frees up for the extra monitors and Thunderbolt capabilities matters to you, then this is the GPU to get. Main thing to note is that 2 of them, at least for now, won't give you twice the performance in most workload scenarios unless your apps really know how to use each GPU to its full potential. In those cases, Vega II is your best friend, and sure is mine. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.